The Vatican stands silent beneath the midnight sky, its halls empty, its grand corridors echoing only memories of the day's bustling activity. Tourists have long since departed, leaving behind only shadows cast by the flickering candles and soft moonlight. At the very top of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics, is awake, troubled, and deeply unsettled. He sits alone in a simple wooden chair at his desk, head bowed, fingers intertwined in silent prayer. Tonight, his usually serene face bears lines of a heavy burden. The flickering candle beside him casts gentle shadows across the crucifix hanging on the wall, deepening the solemn mood. This is a side of the Pope that few ever see, a man weighed down not by the grandeur of his position, but by the relentless whisper of questions that haunt him in the quiet hours. Lord, he whispers softly, voice barely audible in the heavy silence. Did I make the right choice? Most see the Pope as an unshakable pillar of faith, a leader who holds spiritual authority over the faithful, guiding them through crises, celebrations, and the ordinary moments of life. Yet behind the grand vestments, beneath the dignified aura, lies a human being who chose a path of extraordinary sacrifice, a man who surrendered everything. Most people dream of a loving partner, a family, companionship. Leo XIV closes his eyes, and in the darkness of memory, he returns to his younger days, vivid images of hopeful dreams and youthful idealism flooding back. He remembers clearly the day he entered the seminary. He was 22, brimming with passion, his heart aflame with the love of God. His mother, tears shimmering in her eyes, gently kissed his forehead and whispered, "You are choosing God, and God will always be enough." But tonight, decades later, those words echo with a poignant question. Is God truly enough? The Pope rises from his chair, his movements slow and heavy as though the weight of decades rests upon his shoulders. He walks slowly to the window, looking out at the sprawling city of Rome, illuminated softly under the moonlight. Thousands of homes filled with families sleeping soundly, couples holding one another, children nestled safely in dreams, each home a universe of love and connection. And here he stands, the spiritual shepherd of all, utterly alone. A tear gently escapes down his weathered cheek, glinting briefly in the dim candlelight. He whispers into the emptiness. Loneliness isn't the absence of people, Lord. It's the absence of being known. Leo XIV remembers a recent evening vividly, one he hasn't shared publicly until now. A group of newly ordained priests had gathered around him, eyes wide with reverence, hearts open to guidance. They expected standard advice, words about faithfulness, obedience, perhaps the power of prayer. Instead, Pope Leo surprised them with a deeply personal confession. I want to tell you something I have carried silently for decades. He began softly, his voice gentle yet heavy with emotion. The room instantly stilled. Every eye was fixed intently upon him, scarcely believing the Pope himself was about to share something deeply personal. Celibacy is not merely a vow to abstain from physical intimacy, he said, pausing thoughtfully. The world thinks celibacy is about rules and restrictions, but it's far deeper. It is a vow to forego human companionship at its deepest level. It's the willingness to accept profound loneliness, the conscious decision never to belong exclusively to another human being. The young priests watched silently, stunned by the unexpected vulnerability of the Pope. One young priest's eyes filled with tears. Another lowered his head, visibly moved. For the first time, they glimpsed the immense sacrifice they'd committed to, a sacrifice that no seminary lecture had fully captured. Leo XIV's voice softened further, trembling slightly. As a young seminarian, I encountered someone who made me question everything I had believed about my vocation. Her name was Anna. He stopped for a moment, memories visibly washing over him like waves. Anna was radiant. Her presence was warmth itself, joyful, kind, and gentle. We met during a simple parish fundraiser. It began innocently, just brief, friendly exchanges, but gradually I realized something within me had shifted irrevocably. He continued, his voice rich with emotional truth. We never crossed any boundaries, never spoke openly about how we felt, but our hearts knew. Every brief encounter left me both elated and deeply tormented. The Pope paused again, breathing deeply. I found myself at a crossroads I had never anticipated. My spiritual director, a wise old priest, listened patiently when I confessed my turmoil. He did not chastise me. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. God sometimes asks us to sacrifice not just our weaknesses, but our deepest desires, the good, pure things that we cherish most. In the heavy silence of that small gathering, the young priests watched as Leo XIV gently withdrew an old, faded photograph from his pocket, a photograph of Anna, preserved discreetly in his Bible. I have carried this photograph secretly, not as a symbol of temptation, but as a reminder of the cost and beauty of true sacrifice. The Pope shared quietly. Anna taught me that love is real, powerful, and costly. A young priest finally mustered the courage to ask, his voice shaking, Your Holiness, do you ever regret your choice? The Pope smiled gently, a sad yet peaceful expression illuminating his face. Regret and grief are very different things. Regret means I believe I chose wrongly. Grief means I chose rightly, but it still hurts. The memory fades slowly, returning Leo XIV to his dimly lit room atop the Apostolic Palace. He gently touches the crucifix on the wall, whispering a prayer of quiet surrender. Lord, tonight I feel the grief deeply, he whispers, but in that grief I also feel your presence. He returns to his desk, slowly sitting down, eyes fixed on the flickering candle. The weight of his role presses upon him again, the knowledge that tomorrow, countless eyes and hearts will look to him for wisdom, comfort, and hope. And though tonight the loneliness feels almost unbearable, he knows he will continue. Lord, he says softly, addressing the darkness, this is my secret burden, the truth behind my vow. Celibacy is not about lack, but about choosing you over every other love. Help me remember even tonight that you are enough. He gently closes his eyes, breathing deeply, surrendering to a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace forged not in the absence of pain, but within the very heart of sacrifice. Outside, the moonlight continues to gently bathe the ancient stones of the Vatican, silent witness to the profound, hidden struggles of a man revered by millions, yet deeply, humanly alone. The seminary was quiet that winter. Snow fell in gentle flurries across the gardens, and the chapel bells rang with a kind of purity that made even the most distracted student stop and listen. Pope Leo XIV, then, simply Brother Matteo, walked through the stone corridors with his worn Bible tucked under one arm. He had just finished evening prayers and was headed to the rectory when it happened. Her name was Anna. She wasn't dressed like someone about to alter a man's life. She wore a simple coat, scarf, and gloves, her hair tucked back in a bun. She was helping her cousin, another seminarian, with preparations for a charity fundraiser. Their eyes met by the doorway of the church hall. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just still, and completely unforgettable. You're the one who gave the reading last week, she said with a smile. Isaiah. You have a calm voice. I'm surprised you remember, he replied, feeling warmth crawl up his neck. Something stay with you, she said. That was how it started. Simple, innocent, brief exchanges during charity work, community dinners, church events. Conversations about saints, weather, and family traditions. But every word carried weight. Every shared laugh felt like something sacred. And every glance lingered a heartbeat too long. Leo XIV, then Matteo, began to feel something stir within him that he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't lust. It wasn't rebellion. It was something far more dangerous, a sense of being seen. Anna had a laugh that danced through a room like music, and eyes that didn't look at his collar, they looked at his soul. She never flirted, never overstepped. But she didn't need to. She was present. She listened. And she made him feel human. That was the danger. Not temptation, but recognition. One night, while praying alone in the chapel, Matteo found himself weeping. He hadn't broken any vows. He hadn't kissed her or even touched her hand. But he had allowed something to grow, even in silence. And now it was blooming into something that felt dangerously close to love. He took his trembling heart to his spiritual director. "So," the older priest said, "you've met your Anna." Matteo looked up in confusion. "You've felt this?" "Every priest has," the old man smiled. "The church tells you to expect temptation. What they don't tell you is that the real challenge comes when you meet someone good, someone beautiful, not just outside but in here." He pointed to his chest. "And you must choose to walk away from them, not because they're wrong for you, but because you made a promise to someone else." He paused. "And that promise," he continued, "will be tested not by what you reject, but by what you love." Matteo nodded, feeling the ache of truth settle into his bones. The next week, Anna was standing at the back of the chapel after Massachusetts. She smiled when she saw him, a smile filled with warmth and unspoken understanding. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes. I've been reassigned to Rome." There was a long pause. "You'll make a wonderful priest," she said. "And you'll make someone very lucky feel seen," he replied. They didn't hug. They didn't even shake hands. But as she turned and walked away, something inside Matteo felt both broken and made whole. He never saw her again. Years later, after becoming Pope, Leo XIV still carried Anna in his prayers. Not as a temptation. Not even as a regret. But as a reminder. She had shown him what love looked like. And by letting her go, he had come to understand what sacrifice truly meant. In an unexpected way, Anna had helped him fulfill his calling. He often thought about that. About how God sometimes places people in your path not to derail your purpose, but to refine it. Anna had not been a distraction. She had been a mirror, revealing both his longing and his strength. And the lesson stayed with him. In private meetings with young priests, he would share just enough of his story to guide them through their own crossroads. Not every man who takes the vow faces his Anna. But those who do carry a special kind of ache, one that God sees, even if no one else ever does. Late one evening, Pope Leo found himself rereading a letter from a priest named Father Jacob, who had recently written, "Holy Father, I have met a woman who makes me question everything. I have done nothing wrong. But I feel divided. I love my vocation. But I love her too." The Pope folded the letter gently and placed it inside his breviary. That night he wrote back, "My dear son in Christ, the heart can carry more than one great love. But your vow is not about denying love. It's about surrendering it to a greater cause. You are not failing God by feeling. You are honoring Him by choosing." He ended the letter with words he wished someone had told him long ago. "You are not alone in this ache. God sees it. He honors it. And in His time, He transforms it." The Pope looked out over the sleeping city again, the rooftops glowing under the moonlight. Somewhere, he knew Anna was probably married, with children or grandchildren. Maybe she had forgotten him. But he had never forgotten her. She had walked into his life for a season. And then God had walked him deeper into his vocation, with her memory stitched into the lining of his soul. He whispered her name once more. Not with longing, but with gratitude. Because without her, he might never have understood what it truly meant to love and to let go. There's a kind of silence in the Vatican that feels holy, yet sometimes it can feel like a prison. In those quiet chambers, away from the public eye and the grandeur of papal events, Pope Leo XIV lives a life most cannot imagine. Not because of its power, but because of its absence of certain human joys. On a warm evening not long ago, the Pope invited a group of young priests into a private room just off the Sistine Chapel. The group had just been ordained, their faces glowing with the fire of new commitment, hearts ablaze with the promise of a sacred journey. They expected advice. They expected a theological lecture. Instead, they got something far more profound. Pope Leo stood before them, not as the vicar of Christ, but as a fellow brother in Christ. He looked them in the eyes and said, "Let me show you what this vow really costs." He held up the photo of Anna. "This," he said softly, "is what I gave up. Not because it was sinful. Not because it was wrong. But because I had already promised my heart to someone else." The room was dead silent. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loud. The weight of the moment pressed into every soul present. "Celibacy," he continued, "is not a wall. It's a door. But only if you let it be. It opens to a love so wide, so universal, that it can carry the sorrows and joys of millions. But make no mistake, it comes at a cost." One of the priests, Father Elias, raised a trembling hand. "Your Holiness, do you think celibacy is still relevant today? The world has changed so much." The Pope nodded. "Yes, the world has changed. But the heart of man? That has not. We still long to belong. We still ache to be known. And that's what celibacy confronts head on. It says, I will give up being known intimately, so I can be known universally." He paused, then added, "But it hurts. And no one prepares you for that." The Pope shared another story, one that most people would never hear. Years ago, as a young bishop, he had a moment of weakness. It was Christmas Eve. He had just presided over a beautiful midnight. Massachusetts families had gathered, children had laughed, the incense still lingered in the air. And then he went home, alone. He sat at his desk, computer open. He wasn't looking for anything immoral. Just connection. Just a voice. A face. Something that reminded him that he was human. He found himself on a blog, a woman writing about her Christmas with her children, her late husband, her hopes for the new year. He read every word. Not because it was profound, but because it was real, raw, alive. And he longed for that kind of life. For a moment, he hovered over the keyboard, tempted to send a message. Just to say thank you? Just to feel heard. But he didn't. Instead, he shut the laptop, dropped to his knees, and whispered, "Lord, help me to want only you." He cried that night, not dramatic sobs, but quiet, aching tears. The kind you don't tell anyone about. The kind that don't need an audience. He looked up at the young priests and said, "That night I realized something profound. Celibacy doesn't mean you don't love. It means you choose to love without possession." Another priest, Father Danilo, asked, "But how do we survive the loneliness?" The Pope answered gently, "You don't survive it. You walk with it. You let it sharpen you, deepen you, push you closer to the suffering Christ. And you find others, brothers, sisters, who walk with you. That's the only way, he added. And never think you're weak for feeling the ache. The ache is sacred. It reminds you that you still have a heart to give. The meeting ended in silence. No applause. No dramatic gestures. Just a room full of young men who now understood that their calling was far heavier, and far more beautiful, than they'd ever imagined. Later that night, alone again, Pope Leo stood by the window of his study. The lights of Rome twinkled in the distance, and he thought of all the priests around the world, sitting alone, eating dinner in silence, walking into empty homes after long days of ministry. He whispered into the darkness, "They are not forgotten, Lord. Let them feel that you see them, that you treasure their unseen sacrifice." And with that prayer, he turned off the light and stepped into the quiet of his room, carrying the ache and the beauty of celibacy in his soul. The morning after that emotional meeting with the young priests, Pope Leo XIV sat in the Vatican gardens, wrapped in a simple cloak despite the rising sun. The dew still clung to the roses, the birds sang softly in the trees, and yet his heart carried the full weight of the conversation from the night before. He had opened a wound, not for sympathy, not for drama, but for truth. Because the vow of celibacy is not a rigid law. It's a living, breathing mystery. A sacrifice that aches but also illuminates. He reflected on a question one of the priests had asked that lingered in his heart. Why still choose celibacy? Why, indeed? The world doesn't understand it. Even many within the Church question it. Yet here he was, decades into that choice, still waking up every day and saying yes. Still offering up the ache. Still believing in the purpose behind it. And it wasn't out of guilt. It wasn't out of fear. It was out of love. Celibacy, he realized, wasn't the absence of love, it was its expansion. To love without boundaries. To belong to every soul who walked through the doors of the church. To weep with the grieving. Laugh with the joyful, and walk beside the lonely, without ever having to leave anyone out. He remembered another story. A priest named Father Thomas had written him, a man who had served for 20 years with deep fidelity but had recently fallen in love with a widow in his parish. A teacher. A mother of two. His letter read, "Holy Father, I have fought. I have prayed. I have fasted. I have confessed. But I cannot deny the truth, I love her. And I believe God is not angry. I believe He sees the good in this love. But I also know I cannot serve two altars." Pope Leo didn't hesitate. He boarded a plane and flew to see him, not to scold him, not to discipline him, but to listen. When he arrived, Father Thomas was stunned. Tears rolled down his cheeks. They sat in the small kitchen, surrounded by the quiet laughter of children playing in the backyard. The Pope reached across the table and took his hand. "You may not wear the collar anymore," he said gently, "but you will always be a man of God." That was the moment Pope Leo realized something deeper. The vow of celibacy is not about perfection. It's about intention. It's about a path, sometimes walked with joy, sometimes with limping, sometimes with detours, but always with love. That night he wrote in his journal, "We must never confuse the vow with invincibility. We are not statues. We are men, clay in the hands of the potter." He looked up from his notes in the garden and saw a young couple walking hand in hand through the Vatican courtyard. They looked happy in love, free. And for a moment he smiled, not with envy but with peace. "That love is holy," he thought. "And so is mine." Later that evening, during Vespers, Pope Leo gave an unscripted homily that startled many. "Some say the vow of celibacy is outdated," he began. "But I say, look at the world. Look at the loneliness. Look at the hunger to be seen. We need people who are willing to love everyone, not romantically, Not selectively, but universally. He continued, his voice trembling with feeling. Celibacy is not a denial of love. It is its radical redefinition. It is not about what we avoid, but about what we embrace. He paused. Yes, there are lonely nights. Yes, there are memories that ache. But there is also a joy that cannot be taken away, the joy of being entirely God's, and entirely available to His people. He stepped down from the pulpit and sat among the priests. We walk this path together, he said, and when one of us falls, the others do not shame, we lift. That is what love does. As he sat in silence, surrounded by candles and the gentle hum of chant, the Pope realized he had found the answer to that haunting question. Was this the right choice? The answer was yes. Not because it was easy. Not because he had never doubted. But because, in the deepest parts of his soul, he had met Christ. There, waiting, weeping, loving. He closed his eyes and whispered, Lord, thank you for the ache. Thank you for Anna. Thank you for every moment I was tempted to choose otherwise. Because every time I chose you, you met me again. And that has been enough. This is the confession of Pope Leo XIV. Not a scandal. Not a controversy. But a truth so rarely spoken, that even the holiest among us carry hidden wounds. And perhaps that's the point. Because maybe holiness is not about being untouchable. Maybe it's about being vulnerable. About loving deeply and choosing love even when it costs everything. Maybe, just maybe, the vow of celibacy isn't about rejecting love. It's about living it in the most courageous way possible. So the next time you see a priest, a nun, or anyone who has chosen this path, don't see only their robe or collar. See their humanity. Their sacrifice. Their silent strength. Because behind every vow is a story. And behind every story is a beating heart that chose to love, in a way most never will. If this story moved you, share it. Not because it's about the Pope, but because it's about all of us. About what we're willing to give up. About what we choose to hold on to. And about the sacred, silent strength it takes to love like that.